Hello friends, Mark Johnson here. Welcome back to another episode of the TRIRIGA War Room, where experts advise. Hello friends, today I would like to talk to you about formulas. So in TRIRIGA we have a couple different types of formulas. There's regular formulas, there's extended formulas, and I want to do a little bit of a deep dive into them. I recently came across a rather old document on formulas, and it had information in there that was even new to me, that I didn't really know and understand. So I've been trying to do a little bit of learning, deep dive into it, so that I can try and pass on some of what I've found. Again, this is me from the outside looking in. I'm not on the product team. I'm not part of the platform team. I don't have inside knowledge in how TRIRIGA works, but this is merely from observation and working in the system for over 14 years now, almost 15. So let's get ourselves started and we'll get logged in. All right. For reference, in TRIRIGA, there's two documents in the documentation where you can find information on formulas. One of them is the PDF for the App Builder Guide, and that'll have information mainly about regular formulas. And then there's also a PDF, the calculations, the App Builder calculations, and that has information about the extended formulas. So here, I'll show you guys. All right. So this is the App Building Guide calculations. This is your information on extended formulas. You see it's got quite a bit of information that you can get to. Then the regular App Building Guide has some information just on regular formulas. Not a lot there. And then there's this particular technical overview that was put out quite a while ago. This was put out I believe on the 10.6.1 platform. Anyways, you can see, right, it was last updated in December 2019, and this is actually just kind of screenshots from a previous IBM environment before they had communities. So we'll walk through this just a little bit as well. Alright, let's move this out of the way. And we'll get back and get ourselves logged in, and let's go and we'll open up the data modeler. So first we'll talk about just regular formulas. They're also sometimes called simple formulas. And the regular formula, it can only do multiplication, addition, subtraction, and division. It's very limited in what it can do. Let's go ahead and open up an example of this. So I'm going to go to the location, we'll go to the try building, and there's a try area occupant number field. So if I click on this and come down, and I can see that this number field is indeed a formula, and it is a regular formula. So for this particular regular formula, it's accessing fields that are on our object, right? So you can't use a regular formula to go out and access fields that are on a separate object, and you are somewhat limited to the number of things that you can do. So you can see for this particular formula, it's set as a regular formula. It's using the usable area, right, divided by the head count, and that's how it's coming up with the area per occupant. So to find out what field this is going to, this is pointing to the label of the field. So I would have to do Control F in the browser and then type in usable area and find the one that is just usable area. So it's this field here, the try usable area in U field divided by, and then the head count field. And we could do a search and find that same field. So just a note, right? So although you see the label here in the database, the way this is hooked up to is by the field ID of the underlying field. And so what happens is sometimes these regular formulas can get broken. So even though everything looks good here in the front end, in the UI, it's actually broken underneath the covers. So sometimes people accidentally delete a field. For instance, like if we were to delete this usable area and then went, oh snap, I needed that for my formula, and then I went ahead and I created a new try usable area in U field and added it back to the business object and published the business object. If I went to this area occupant in U field and looked at the properties, everything still looks right? I've got a field named usable area. I've got a field, well, not named, labeled usable area. I've got a field labeled head count, right? So as far as I can tell as a person, this formula looks correct. But under the covers, it's using the field ID of the fields. So once I delete the field and then create a new field, the new field has a different field ID. And so it'll get broken. So there are some formulas in the system that happen to get broken or are broken over time. And again, there's no way through the front end that you can tell that they're broken. The only way to identify them is to do it through the back end, through the database, utilizing SQL, or unless you happen to be using the object and you're paying attention to the server logs, and you go and you can see that things are broken. So again, regular formulas, pretty sweet, simple. It's my dear Aunt Sally, right? Multiplication, division, addition, and subtraction. That's it. That's all you can do. And it all happens, pretty much immediately. So whenever any one of these field values change, then the formula is going to recalculate immediately and then update. So one of the things you'll find too with a formula field is you can no longer map to a formula field with a workflow. Used to be a trick that you would do to try to force a recalculation. It's more for extended formulas, and we'll get to those in just a second here. All right. So the extended formula engine is actually seen in multiple places within TRIRIGA. So one, we can see it on business objects just like this, right? With a field, instead of being regular, you can select extended. In workflow, the start task, switch tasks, the break task, right? Wherever you see that expression builder, it has access to the formula engine, right? You can call and access system formulas. So let me just go ahead and I will open up the workflow builder and we'll show you. So I'm just going to go ahead and create a new workflow so I don't have to revise an existing business object. But the start task, see, it's loading the expression editor right here. This expression editor, you can see it has access to system functions, add day, right, to upper, to date, and user functions. All these functions are part of that extended formula engine. The extended formula engine has access to these same system functions. So you see the usage of the extended formula agent in more places than you might think just initially. So when it comes to extended formulas, we have the ability to refer to not only object or fields that are on our object, but we can refer to outside objects. So you can do a single hop, which just means one association that you're going to walk from your object to a related object, or you do multi-hop. So you can walk the association from your object to the next object and an association from that object to another object, n times, right? So you have the ability to walk and crawl through. So we'll go ahead and we'll break it up and we'll talk about these in different ways. So I'll give you an example of a no-hop extended formula first. So a good example of this, I went ahead and pre-found some of these objects. You don't have any ability in the front end to say, hey, show me everything where there's an extended formula, right? Show me the single hop ones, the no hop ones, the multi-hop ones, nothing like that. So under try calculation item module, the try program funding item business object, there is a field named try working forecast distribution or distributed in U. So if I click on that, we can see it's an extended formula. So if I click here where it says enter, we can pull up the extended formula. So we can see our parameters, our variables, our inputs, whatever you want to call them, right? The values that you put here are then the values that you use, right, in your formula. So these are tokens, right? So you want to give these good meaningful names, just like in programming, you want to give your variables meaningful names. You don't want to have everything just named X, Y, Z, right? Because it hurts the readability of people that are looking at it. So this is actually a good example in the out of the box where it has some readability, because when all you see is total per period divided by factor, well, you have some idea of what this formula is doing. You may not know what the underlying fields are. But in this case, right, this extended formula really could be done as a regular formula because it's accessing our same object, right, and it's just fields on our same object. All right. So that's an example of the no hop. Right? And this is just using fields. Now we do have the ability to use queries as well. And so there is a single hop query, right? And then a multi-hop query is done using the advanced filters, how you can daisy chain queries, right? Where one record set of one query then is used as a filter to filter down the record set of the next query. So, however many daisy chain queries you have, that's the number of hops that you have. All right, so for the single hop, we're going to stay on our same object here. And we'll go to try current fiscal year funding in you. All right. All right. So in this case, this is a single field, right? We've got one parameter, one token here is all, right? And it's going the program funding for association to the try intermediate module to the try funding source intermediate object. One single step, we walk the association and we're getting the field, because again it's a field-based one, and it's getting the try total program funds in you value. Right? So we're able to pull in that value from that field and have it display the results on our object. All right, and then for an example of a multi-hop, we need to open up another object. All right, actually it's going to be our same business object. So this is a wonderful object here because we get an example of all three types, the no hop, the single hop, and then the multi-hop. So this try days in fiscal year in you field, again we can see it's an extended formula. If I click on enter, we can see this is going using the program funding for association, walking to the try intermediate module, the try funding source intermediate, right? And then is using the association is fiscal period 2, and then is going to the classification module, the try fiscal period, and it's getting the start date. And then does the same thing here for the end date. So you can see how we're walking from object to object to object to ultimately get the field value that we want. So this is a multi-hop field-based extended formula. Now, for a query, they're a little bit different, and I need to go to a different object this time. So we're going to go over to the location module, and we're going to go to the try floor, and we'll go to the try head count in U field. All right. So the try head count in U field, as you can see, it's query based. And so if we look at this, right, it's the location, try space, formula, spaces associated to try floor. So this is the module, this is the BO, and then this is the name of the query that is being utilized, and then this is the field that's in that query that's being returned. So you have the ability to return a single value, or you can do it as total, right? So total will sum up the value of that column and return the total, just like you can do a sum inside the query itself. Now, something to know about query-based formulas is the name of the formula is very important, because this is one of the few places in the system that underneath the covers, it's not hooked up by the ID of that object. So in this case, this query, its ID, the query ID, is not stored at all in the formula. It's solely based off of the name. So if you go out and you rename this particular query, so let's go find this query. Try space formula spaces associated. So I'm going to go ahead and open up another tab just to make it easy so I don't lose my place. And then we'll go, and we're going to go to the report manager. It's going to be a system report, and the name, let's try space formula. Alright, we've got a few here, so what's the rest of the name? Spaces associated to try4. Alright, so it's this guy right here. So whenever you're using a formula that's tied to a query, right, you want to make sure, one, that you have a dedicated query for your formula, right? Because you don't want people to rename it, make changes to it, break your formula. So here's a good example, right? The tag that's being used here in the query is, right, or that's how the naming convention for queries goes. We say how's it being used. So this is telling us this is running against the try space object, and it's used by formulas, right? And then we've got a little description to tell us how it's used. We're just going to go to the where used, and we'll just do a little cheat here and make sure that they're doing it cleanly. So yep, you can see it's just used by a single field. This is great. This is ideal kind of circumstance. Now for the column, you really only need the values that are being returned. So this query is doing just a little bit of extra work because it's having to grab a couple extra columns. One thing we want to make sure that you do in a query for your formulas, you don't need sorting, right? Because it doesn't matter, you know, what order you're adding up objects, right? And then under filters, you don't need any user filters because this query isn't being used by a user. In this case, there is a system filter, and that's fine. It's just filtering out the retired objects. That's what we want. And then we can look and see here it's using a record as the source to filter the objects, right? So when I was talking about multi-hop queries, right, this is where instead of being a record, you would set it to a query and then you point to another query, right? So that's how you have a multi-hop extended formula, query-based formula. So all in all, this is a pretty good query. This kind of thing here where you see a few extra columns, it's kind of usual because as a person that's creating this, right, I need the query to make sense, the data to make sense. So it makes sense that you would add the ID and the name and stuff to it initially so that you can go out and run the query, you can run the report, and then you can see, hey, does this make sense now? This is an out-of-the-box environment, so there are no buildings, floors, spaces, or anything else in it, so running it doesn't give me any data. But if I was trying to validate the query that I built, troubleshoot my formula, right, I would have some of the stuff so that I could chase down and make sure that I've got the right values. Right. Once you've done that, however, remove the extra unnecessary columns. Right. It's very minor hit on performance, but you should always develop with performance in mind and think about what you can do. Right. One of the worst things you can do is take a display query and utilize it for your formula, where you have a display that's sorting, which is one of the most expensive things that you can do in the database. Right. It can have a real negative impact on your queries. Historically, there were a lot of formulas that were done this way. They are pointing to display queries because the display query already returned all the results that we wanted. So it may seem a little bit inefficient to make a second copy of a display query and use it specifically for formula, but you don't want them, you don't want somebody to mess, right, with your query and break your formula, right? If this was a display query, what if, the users decided, what, we don't want to see head count here, we want to see some other field. And so they have a developer come and remove this field and add a new one. Well, now you've broken your formula because the column that it's looking for is no longer being returned by the query. So at least if you have a query that has formula in the name, right, that tells you as a developer, wait a minute, I have to be very careful with what I do. I got to make sure that I don't do anything that's going to break it, like renaming, right? One of the things, the worst things is, you build a formula, you build a query, you get your formula working, and then you notice you've got a typo or a spelling error in the query name. Well, you can't just rename the query. You have to actually go back to your formula and reset and redo all the different parameters so that it has the right values. Because again, it's one of the few places in the system where it utilizes the name and not the ID of the object. All right, so that's extended formulas when it comes to multi-hop, single hop, right, using query-based. So let's go ahead and we're going to go in and take a look at what are some of the things that we can do inside the extended formula. So for that, we need to come back here, and I'm going to just go ahead and I'll revise this business object, and we'll open this back up. Now we can see that it's editable. We can do other things. So I'm going to add just another parameter here. I'm not going to save it, and I'm going to revert this back to out of the box. But so you can see with the extended formula, right, we can point to a field or a query. If it's a field, then it's going to open up this element, and I'm going to go ahead and expand this. So we can see that we can select, right, we can select fields that are in our sections, right? So there's a general section, there's record information section. We can go, we can select something that's in one of our sections on our objects, right? Or we can go ahead and we can select something by walking doing the hops, right? So to do a hop, you walk the association. So like, let's say I wanted something here on the planning item, then I can walk this association. I would expand it. Now I have access to the sections that are on it, and I have access to the associations that are on that, defined on that business object, right? So if I wanted to do a multi-hop, well, then I just go ahead and click into the association, and then, right, now I've got access to the sections there. Right? So that's how you do a multi-hop or a single hop. That's how you configure it, right? Is you just go in and you click and you drill down the associations until you get to the field or the related field that you want. And for a query, again, you can see you can take values for total. So generally you're going to be doing the total, you're going to be summing up the records. So for the query, right, it's just a picker, right? So you can see location, try space. See how everything's based off of the name here. So when you pick something, so in order to pick the fields that are on the query, it's got a little plus that you expand, right? So you got to drill down into it. So here's the head count on the building, right? So it's the total that field that this query returns, right? So that's how you you go and you set up the query. Again, for the multi-hop part of the query, that's done in the query itself by having your formulas. All right, so when it comes to the actual formula that gets used, right, there are quite a few different formulas, and this isn't very helpful, the way that this scrolls down like this, and it doesn't tell you anything about, well, what's the format of things, right? I mean, you do a little bit, like to get the current time, it's just this current time function, right? And then this, the duration for milliseconds, is you put the time in milliseconds, and then the number of months, right? But when it comes to strings, right? Well, are strings, are they enclosed in single quotes? Are they enclosed in double quotes? What's going on? What actually is here? So this is where you're going to refer to the calculation user guide. So I just want to bring this guide back over here so you can see there's some valuable information in the guide, especially when it comes to dealing with strings, right? So you can actually enclose the string in either double quotes or single quotes, but if you have a string that has quotes or a single quote in it, then there's a little bit of work that you need to do, right? So this walks you through that process. The other thing, let's see if we can find where they list out the different formulas. Hold on. All right, so if we keep scrolling down, eventually we can come to the part here, and this will tell us, and this will give us a little bit more information about the different formulas. So one of the things I've done is I've actually taken all these different formulas and I've pulled them out of the guide, and I've stuck it inside of Evernote so that I can have a quick and handy reference to it. And then it helps also for when you're trying to build, and if you come across an issue or something, then you can give yourself make little additional notes. For instance, like if you're trying to use the backslash character inside of a text string, well, in the formula builder, that backslash character is a control character, right? Like you're going to put in a hexadecimal code or something, right? So if you want to use that backslash character, well, then you have to escape it by doing another backslash, right? Well, none of that is really called out here in the guide, and so I've added additional notes for myself. But anyways, you can see, right, it's helpful to have a English description of what the different predefined system functions, formula functions do, right? And it's these same formula functions that are available whether you're in the workflow expression builder side or you're in the extended formula side, right? It's the same engine that processes it. It's all the extended formula engine. All right. So that brings me to the other document, this technical overview document that I had found out there. So this introduced to me a concept that I wasn't really familiar with. From having used TRIRIGA a long time, I understood about the different types of formulas, the formula picker, right? So you can do the formula in the mappings too, right? Not just the expression editors. So this document, it covers a lot of the same sort of thing. And it tells us about the timings, right? So a formula is always evaluated when a value of a formula field is retrieved from the record. Formula is marked dirty if at least one of the source field's values is changed. Right? So something to pay attention to from the workflow side of things is going to be, actually, let me go ahead and close this out and go here. We'll go back to the workflow builder I want to show. I need to modify record task. Alright, so if I build a formula and I put it in here, and then it's going to show up in here. Now the value that you see in the space here will be just that actual formula part. You don't see what the inputs are. So this bar here, this data here is what you will see listed here, right? So that's why you want to have a good, meaningful token names, right, or variable names for your formula. The other thing that you need to take into consideration is a while back, the default setting on the formulas, on like the modify task, the create records task, the trigger action task, right? They all used to have a setting of recalculate as needed. That was the default value whenever you created a formula. And the recalculate as needed was semi-conservative in that it would err on the side of recalculating formula rather than not. Well, the problem is, as you build out a workflow with task after task after task, everything's set to recalculate it as needed, and that would result in a lot of extra calculations of formulas, right? And so that can take time, and was actually a big performance hit in the system and under certain processes, especially when you're calculating up like values and leases and that sort of thing. So they made a switch and they moved this to where the default value now is disable auto recalculation. So you as the developer have to be intentional about when you want that object to be calculated or that formula to be recalculated, right? So this is helpful because it helps us improve the performance. We're not getting a bunch of recalculations we don't want, because developers never would go in and change this value. They would just leave it as the default value. So they weren't really controlling when the recalculation would happen, so that, maybe do the recalculation once, at the end if it, had to be done. So now your workflows are kind of better performing from the get-go because they're not going to recalculate. But that can cause a problem. You go and you build this beautiful workflow with beautiful formulas in it, and you think you have everything working great, and the workflow runs, and your formula doesn't recalculate, even though you've changed some of the values. Some of the inputs are dirty, so it should recalculate. This is why. You have to come into the workflow, and you have to change the formula, or you have to set a task to force the recalculation. So you need to think about where in the workflow process does that make sense to do. Now, granted, this is only with the workflow-based, well, not just the workflow-based formulas, but also the formula on your underlying object, right? So if you're manipulating, like for instance, that floor was pulling the values from the space, right? To get the head count to roll up. So if we went in and we made changes to an underlying space record, and then we expected the floor to automatically recalc, it wouldn't, right? If the underlying object that we're dirtying to make the formula recalc, right? We're doing that with our modify record task, but we have disable auto recalculation. That's going to prevent the formula that's using that from recalculating, right? So we have to know if there's formulas using it and then force the recalc when it makes sense. So part of this has to do with the graph, which is that other document that I showed you. Here, there. So let me just scroll down a little bit. There. So here's the part that I'd never heard the term before. I had probably been in TRIRIGA for over 10, 11 years at the point that I first saw this. So we can see based off of this, right? So whenever the record or the underlying association changes, there's a couple things that happens, right? It checks the graph and says, hey, does this change other data? And then it puts something into the queue, right? And then the extended formula queue, the agent, it pulls from the queue, it checks the graph to identify the affected records, and then it goes and it updates those effective records. the agent is going to be part of the admin console. So let's go ahead and we'll log into the admin console. So under agents, right, we've got an extended formula agent. So this is something else that you want to check. If you have a formula that's not calculating, make sure your agent's running. Sometimes it does get hung up. It's good to, just to cycle the agent, click stop, and then start. Another area here in the admin console that can be helpful is if you go under the performance monitor. Under the performance monitor, there's going to be some information where we will be able to see what the extended formula Q count is. So here's where you can see, hey, do I have formulas that are getting backed up in the queue, right? So if you monitor it, you can see, if the queue is growing or if it's going down. All right, let's go back to our document. All right, so what is the graph exactly, and how does it work? I don't completely understand that. I don't have a lot of detail on it, but this is kind of what I've seen. I mean, because this document here to me isn't fully explaining. Because the way it seems to make the most sense to me is that when there's a change, the system updates the graph. If there's affected data, then it puts the item into the queue. And then the agent, right, it picks up items from the queue, it checks the graph to find what the affected data is, and then it goes and it updates those affected records. So this seems to be drawn out a little bit. And then here, right, there's no context or anything. Why is this orange now instead of green? I don't know. I didn't create this original document. But so here you can see, right, the graph determines if a change will affect data and then what's affected. So what the graph is it's actually a table in the database. So you can observe it. All right, so the graph is actually a table in the database. So if I pop over here to the database, I can see this cache value persistence, right? This is the graph right here. So it's actually stored into this blob field, and it's actually a serialized Java object that's there. So one of the things that I did is I actually used there's a Google tool once upon a time called deserialize that will take and break up that object. So I went into the blob field, I downloaded the underlying file, and then I used the deserialize to deserialize it. And then when I look at the output, this is a result of the output. So this can show you a little bit of what's in the graph. I can't necessarily read it all. I haven't dug in a whole lot, but you can see there's a target node, there's a source node, right? Not sure what these reference exactly, but I can see and get a little bit of information in here, right? That there's there's path ID, or in this case, here's a better example, right? Here's a field ID, and then this is the BOID. Well, I could actually go and see which business object has that spec template ID, and then what field on it has that particular ID. So what appears to happen is, so the formulas, there's a formula table, and actually there's a couple tables that make up the formulas. You've got the formulas and the parameters, and that's stored in the database. But from a performance perspective, you don't want the system having to go scan multiple tables and join them, and then parse through strings and everything else to be able to see what objects are being impacted, right? And that's what the role of this graph is. By having this serialized Java objects, it's very fast, very efficient, and the system can keep track of, what the inputs to different formulas are, or the outputs, right? So that it makes it easier for it to identify if something's been changed. That's my understanding of the system so far. Perhaps I'll learn more and understand this better, or somebody will explain it to me. Again, I'm not part of the platform team. I don't have any insight or knowledge other than from the outside, observing in and, and also trying to do a little bit of, kind of reverse engineering and digging in and understanding. All right. So again, for this is the serialized Java objects deserialized, so I could take a look at it. And if you actually look, right, the blob file that was saved from the database was only 138K, and then deserialized, it's a little over 3 meg. So it's very compact, very fast for the system to utilize. All right, let's go back to our document. All right. So again, the graph, right, determines if a change will affect data and then what objects are affected, right? The system goes in and does that work, right? The extended formula relationships are loaded from the graph, right? You've got association tokens, the query tokens, right? So we talked about the tokens in the formula, and so what queries are used to determine whether it modifies data, right? So here we go, right? Does it change other data, right? If so, then it's going to put something into the agent, right? So we've got these two different services, the Smart Object Service, right? So that's from BO changes, association change service from the associations, right? Because again, remember on our hops, right? We can walk associations, we can do all that sort of stuff. So the associations and deassociations can have an impact on objects, right? So if you're trying to sum up all the values on a floor, if you remove a space from the floor, well, then you would want that deassociation event to trigger your formula to have it recalculate, right? Same thing if you added a new space, then it would have to go in and potentially run. So the graph does get updated when meta changes are made. So when you publish a business object, right? Or which would happen also with object migration if it replaces an object. Right? So here's where it talks about the graph, how it's persisted into that table in the database, right, as a serialized Java object in a blob column. So I've showed you that, right, and it's done because it reduces the amount of time to recalculate. So these different things that happen, right, they update the graph, and that gets stored in that table. All right, so there is another database table. There's a table for the extended formula, the Q. So there's a table that has the graph in it, and then there's a table for the Q. So I don't have to go and show you in the database what it looks like, since there's kind of a result already here in the document, which is good because I have an out-of-the-box environment, so I don't have any formulas going on or data or anything to capture to show you. But the table is called EF_Q, and you can see here was where a selection was done of some of the values. You can see it sorts the spec ID of the record, right? The spec template ID, which is the business object ID. If it's a field, it's ID. If there's associated object, what its spec ID, right? The record ID, that associated object. The spec template ID, which is the BO ID of that related object, and then the association that's being walked. So you can monitor the size of the extended formula queue by executing queries in the database, not just by doing it through the admin console. The queue, it is FIFO, right? So it's first in, first out. So the first thing put into it will be what's processed, with the last things being processed last, right, so that things don't get too buried. But if you're doing some heavy processes, you can definitely end up with a very large extended formula queue that can take quite a while to burn down. Alright, hey, I think I just answered my question why things are in orange. It looks like they're highlighting their orange before they start talking about it. So, alright, so then the last thing is the extended formula agent. Right, that's what goes out, grabs an item from the queue, then goes and checks the graph and says, hey, does this impact affect records? If it gets affected records, and it goes and then it updates the affected records. And then it just shows you some of the stuff that we've already seen, but you can see this also references, right, the same calculations document that we have here. And then it gives you a little bit of, helpful hints, and can walk you through a little demo. So you can see this is from around the 3.6 version, and then there's even a little bit of SQL that they give you here for querying from the queue, so you can see, right. And then there's something I forgot to mention. So logging, right? You can go in under the platform logging, and you can set additional logging on the extended formula so that you can get information about when it's building the cache or not. Which actually, you know what? That reminds me of, there is, all right. So one of the good things that you can do from the admin console, if you want to try to find issues and errors. So I'm going to come and I'm just going to roll this error log. Sorry. So if you come under caches too, and you clear your extended formula cache, this is also a pretty good way to find broken formulas. So then you just have to come and then monitor the error log as it rebuilds the cache. So I haven't done it in this out-of-the-box environment. I'm not sure if we'll find anything. I would not be surprised if we did. So actually, you know what? It's probably, so this is today's date and time. All right. So one of the things I like to do when I'm doing work, if it possible, is I like to tail the server log so I can see issues as they pop up in real time. But you can see when we told it to rebuild the cache, right? Look at this line, build new graph, right? And then building cache, enrolling cache. So it took almost a minute in this out of the box, and no errors. So that's great. Yeah, that means they've cleaned this up. Some of the out of the box versions, some of the older versions, did have some long-standing broken formulas. So it's good to see that they've been getting cleaned up, and it's good to do in your own environment, right? So you can identify, hey, what formulas are broken, and you can go out and fix them. Again, this is just the extended formula cache. It's not the the regular or simple formulas. So again, the only way to find errors and issues with them, or the best way for both, in my opinion, is to do it with SQL. It's actually some of the stuff that I check for in the metadata health check. Is I'll go through and I'll identify every broken formula in the system, whether it's an extended formula or a regular formula. Sometimes it's silly stuff, like somebody set something, a field to be a formula, and then they never put a formula on it. So, and sometimes it's not. It's something more complex. But anyways, that's formulas. There's basically the 3 different reference guides that you can look at and dig in and utilize. So again, you you can do multi-hop formulas. That tends to get forgotten by a lot of developers. It's something that I remember creating kind of early in my development career, but haven't created a multi-hop one for a long time. So it was kind of good to go back and do the refresher. Do read through the user guides too, if you haven't, so that you at least have an idea of what's out there. How to do it. You might want to make your own little note cheat sheet that has the segment information from the extended formulas, so that you can see what the different system functions do and have a better understanding of them without just relying on just the little blurb command that's in the workflow builder. So, all right, I hope you found this helpful. Digging into it, I was able to learn a little bit, refresh my memory on some of this stuff. So just goes to show, it doesn't matter how long you've done this, there's always
friends,
something to learn.
that wraps up another episode of the TRIRIGA
Thank you for watching, and
thank you for watching this
look forward
episode.
to seeing you next time.
If you like these videos and you find them helpful, please do like and subscribe to the channel. Your subscriptions are the only way that I have to know if you find these videos helpful and if I should continue to make them or not. I do these videos on my own time. I'm not currently compensated in any way for them. So if they're not helpful, I'd much rather go and work on some of my other side projects. So here at the TRIRIGA War Room, we really do want to be your expert advisors and to help you to better implement and use TRIRIGA. So if you have any ideas for future videos, or even if you would like to guest instruct a future video, please do let me know. Again, thanks for watching. We look forward to seeing you next time.